Welcome again to Authors and Innovators. I'm Larry Gennari from Gennari Aronson, and continuing with this year's theme around the changing shape of business, I'm delighted to welcome the authors of the fascinating new book, Your Brain on Art, How the Arts Transform Us. And I want to welcome the author. Susan Magsamen is the founder and director of the International Arts and Mind Club, the Center for Applied Neuroaesthetics at Johns Hopkins. She's also the co-director of the Aspen Institute's NeuroArts Blueprint. Her co-author is Ivy Ross, also an artist, and the VP of Design for Hardware Products at Google. And she's won a variety of awards for design, and she is still designing as we speak. So, Susan and Ivy, welcome. How did the two of you, Johns Hopkins, Google, how did the two of you come together, find each other to write this book?
Well, maybe I'll start and Ivy can jump in. At Johns Hopkins, I do run this Center for Applied Neuroaesthetics in the School of Medicine, which is a really weird place to be talking about the arts. But we had a donor, and still do, who believes that the arts can save us. And she inspired Hopkins through a very large donation to start to think about this in a very tangible way. And along the way, I wanted to lift up the work that was already being done in the field by architects, designers, musicians, and knew of Ivy's work. Many years ago, I sold a creative arts company to Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. And it was about the same time that Ivy was at Mattel running the girls division. And so years ago, when we were looking to put together something called a Luminary Scholars Group, I thought about Ivy. And so I literally blind linked in her, sort of like you would on a dating service.
I love that. So that works. That works.
Well, it did for us. And it did for my marriage, too, to be honest. But yes. And so, so I reached out and I said, this is what I do. And I've known about your work for a really long time. And I would love to share this work that we're doing and see if you'd be interested.
And when Susan told me that neuroscience was discovering or validating what a lot of us creatives and designers knew intuitively, I'm like, I love science. I mean, in that science was validating the work that I do and many others do. And so we had a salon at my home between neuroscientists and artists, and it was an amazing conversation. At the end of that conversation, Susan looks at me and said, I've always wanted to write a book about this. Do you want to do it with me? And I said, yes, this is the book I've been waiting for.
Oh, wow. That's wonderful. So there's so much that has been written about the brain and science and art separately. For our audience of entrepreneurs, business leaders, why do the arts matter, especially now?
Well, I think there's a couple reasons why the arts are so relevant right now. And I think one of them is that we have been really optimizing for productivity since the Industrial Revolution, thinking that was going to make us more innovative, more productive, more creative, but in fact, it hasn't. And we're really seeing rises in mental health, going beyond physical health. We're also seeing that coming out of the pandemic, there's huge issues around loneliness and isolation. And I think from a business point of view, what we're seeing is that our communities, our social fabric has really been very frayed, and really looking to try to think about how do we build community, how do we build connection, how do we build these creative teams, and how do we really think imaginatively about what we want to do, why do we want to do it, and why does that give us meaning? What is that purpose and meaning for us to be able to do that? And so I think it's no surprise that a book like ours would hit the New York Times in 6 days, because people are hungry for other ways of really coming to terms with what their life can be and tools to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think we've been very transactional, and we're really seeking, we really are looking for some things that are more transformational now. And so the irony is, the arts are actually our birthright, and they are something that, as culture way back when, we didn't even have a word for art because it was culture. I mean, singing, dancing, making art. I mean, that was just the way we lived. And there's a reason that we were designed to be that way. And I think we've, over the years, stopped engaging in the arts because we thought we either weren't good at it, we weren't going to make a living at it, not realizing that our physiology needs it, whether we're the maker or the beholder.
And I love in the book, you take the reader on a journey and you help them understand that art, and you define art broadly as well, and you talk about the impact on mental health, physical health. I was really taken with some of the examples in the book about how art can transform the way we think about people. Judith Scott was one of the folks that you profiled in the book. Maybe you could talk about her, as well as Aaron Miller, a firefighter dealing with PTSD. So I wonder if you could talk about those two use cases for our business audience and give them a sense of what they might expect about the connections you make in the book between art and people.
Yeah, Susan, why don't you talk about Judith and I'll talk about Aaron, the firefighter.
Okay.
How about that?
Okay. So, and I think maybe it's important to sort of level set to say that neuroaesthetics, which is really what the book is about, the science of this, is how the arts and aesthetics measurably change our brains, bodies, and behavior, and how this knowledge can be translated into specific practices, everyday practices, and also clinical practices that advance health and well-being. And so the frame of the book really looks at a neurobiological journey, and then we use these use cases to really amplify how, if you understand, as Ivy said, that the arts are our birthright and that we are literally wired for art, that's how we bring in the world, that the applications for this work are really profound. So in Judith's case, Judith is a twin, and Judith was born with very significant intellectual and physical disabilities. And her family decided that they couldn't care for her, and they put her in an institution, literally most of her young adult life. So it wasn't until she was almost 40 that her sister brought her out of the institution and had her work with a group called Creative Growth. Creative Growth is in Oakland, California, and they work with people with all kinds of differences, and they provide an open art studio, and they literally let people find their way, find their voice.
Wow.
An open studio. So, and it usually takes 2 years for someone to be able to unpack the trauma and the drama and the repression and the depression that's happened in their lives to begin to find their voice. So as you said, we broadly define arts as creative self-expression, and that's used for your own your own reflections and your own insights, but also how you share yourself with the world. So in Judith's case, she found fiber, she found yarn and fabric, and she started to create these amazing womb-like orbs that she could get her arms around, that were soft, that she could hug. And in her case, the work was shared in galleries and picked up by museums, and she really became a phenomenal artistic success. That doesn't have to happen for it to have had profound meaning for her, but it's really a beautiful story in the way that she found her voice and was able to share it.
Yeah, I just love, I want to talk about Aaron Miller. But you interviewed over 100 people for this book. There's so many, it's just jam-packed with great examples, and you really, it is one of those books of such a great topic where you just read story after story, connection after connection. Talk a little bit about Aaron Miller, because we've got someone who is not neurotypical, who connects with art, connects through art, but Aaron used it in a different way.
Yeah, so, we have traumas every day, micro traumas. There's major traumas in our life, and then there's these micro traumas. And I think we just keep, in fact, now they say the last 3 years, we've gone through more than people back in World War II did, because it's political, it's weather, it's unbelievable. And we don't even realize how it's affecting our physiology. And so this idea that the arts, and again, when we say arts, it's theater, it's dancing, it's singing, it's painting, is a form of self-expression. And if you can express what your emotion, and by the way, emotion is energy in motion, and you need to clear that energy out, it helps prevent you from getting ill. So with Aaron, there's a woman who started Art to Ashes, and she was taking frontline firemen coming out of blazing fires who had experienced trauma. I mean, they either had to leave someone behind, and and in the case of Aaron, he would come home and his behavior with his family was not appropriate because you're carrying trauma with you.
Right.
So Art to Ashes, the firemen would come out of fires, and one example is she'd hand them a paintbrush and just say, paint, get that paint on that canvas. And again, in some cases, zero skill, but just the using it as a tool to get out whatever, even if you can't put words to it. Sometimes you can't, even in trauma, the Broca region of the brain shuts down. You cannot put words to it, but by expressing the feelings and getting that out through making something, the trauma is released. So Aaron he's going to other firehouses and teaching other firemen how to make things, how to paint, because it has really helped him. Absolutely. And the book, there was so much science to explain, but we wanted to do it through storytelling. So you're absolutely right. It's a combination of learning some of the physiology and science of why neuroaesthetics, which is really about taking in things through your sensory systems. I think we are so conditioned to, there's a quote we have in the book about, we think that we're thinking beings that have learned to feel, but we're actually feeling beings that have learned to think.
Isn't that true?
And when you think about that, it turns everything upside down, because we are so in our cognitive mind, and yet the truth is we are designed to be feeling beings first. So Susan can talk about some of the statistics of how many feelers and nerve endings there are in each finger, in our nose. I mean, we have to get out of our heads sometimes and get into our bodies and feel the world and take the world in through our senses.
Well,
and you cover a powerful example from close by to MIT, where you talked about the work of a neuroscience and both the sound and light impact for Alzheimer's patients. Susan, I'd love to hear more about that. I mean, I loved the description in the book. I kept returning to it. It's folded down. It's a great story, and I think our audience in particular will want to learn a lot about that. And for me, I left this trying to find that 40 hertz sound and make sure that I could play it every day.
Yeah. Just to add one point to what Ivy was saying about Aaron, to bring that story to a business context or to our daily lives, when she was talking about these small micro traumas or bigger traumas, firefighters are not dissimilar to us in that they're never out of the zone of highly stimulating experiences, right? They're always moving into literally a fire. Sometimes we think we're going into the fire, into the frying pan and all of that.
Right.
They don't see this as therapy. They see it as self-care. And I want to underscore that because I think there's an opportunity for all of us to think about not intervention, not therapy, but as practice, that we do these things every day so that we feel better and we are able to process all of the complexities of things that happen to us all the time. So I just wanted to add that. The story in Boston is really fascinating. Li Wei Sai is at MIT. She's a neuroscientist, and she had this concept that we would be able to use light and sound, 40 hertz light and sound, to be able to address Alzheimer's. And optogenetics is a huge and growing field that has really started to elucidate the ways that light affects our brains and bodies. And it makes sense because light is such a major factor in circadian rhythms and in all of the things that we do throughout our day. And so initially she started with rats, experimenting with different hertz and different sound and light hertz, and ultimately settled on 40 hertz, which is approximately the Earth's vibration, which I think is really interesting, and was able to figure out that when that combination was used over a period of time in this rodent population, they were able to see plaque and amyloid literally disintegrate and go out through the waste system in the brain.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
Just unbelievable.
And so now
so fascinating.
right? She's doing it with people, and it's literally, you can buy it in a store near you pretty soon, right? There's a actual apparatus, a device that she's created that is being used for patients who have Alzheimer's, and she's getting fantastic results. So, we're talking about curing a disease, not managing symptoms, but curing a disease through aesthetic experiences, and that's what's so profound.
I just found the entire book, so many of the chapters talk about art and as restorative, and it truly is. I want to talk about AI and this cover. So tell me a little bit how this came about and how AI figured into it.
Well, Refik Anadol is a fantastic digital artist. He actually, early on in his career, did an internship at Google where he really learned about algorithms, and then he applies that, and now he's quite famous. In fact, he just recently, we saw an article, the big dome that's in Las Vegas, they're taking his images. What he does is he'll, for example, in a museum, he'll have scanned thousands of images of all the images that a museum has, run an algorithm program that remixes those images.
Wow.
And so through these incredible designs, well, the cover there was actually the MRI brain scans of thousands of
Oh my goodness, how appropriate. It's beautiful.
well, that's why we used it, because it is, we always loved his art, but in this case it was brain scans that were combined through an algorithm to come up with a new idea of what, a brain might be. So that was the connection there. And when Susan just talked about practice, I want to say art is the highest form of meditation. And so when you talk about having a practice every day, and some of the things through this book that we have found out, just 25 minutes of art will lower cortisol. I mean, there's some real clear facts in the book that our goal was to, just like science has proven that exercising 20 minutes a day or 30 minutes a day and sleeping 7 hours a day is important, we now have the science to show that making art or beholding it 20 minutes a day needs to be part of that diet.
And you don't have to be good at it.
Great insights. You don't have to be good at it. Everyone can do it. One of the things that you also talk about is reading. So I'd love to hear, Susan and Ivy, what you're reading these days.
So ironically, I am reading, well, not ironically, but The Power of Sound, How to Be Healthy and Productive Using Music and Sound.
Wonderful.
It's actually a book I read years and years and years ago, because I've studied sound and vibration for about 40 years. But now this is a second edition, updated, so I'm looking for any new information.
Oh, that's terrific. And I think I had mentioned to you before we started, Susan Rogers' book, This Is What It Sounds Like, we profiled last year in Authors and Innovators, has to get added to your stack. It's a wonderful book. Susan, tell me about what you're reading.
So I am reading a book called The Well-Gardened Mind, The Restorative Power of Nature by Sue Stort-Smith. And it's just a gorgeous book about the science and the art of nature. And, we interviewed E.O. Wilson, who was an evolutionary biologist at Harvard, who talked with us about the fact that we were in nature 99.8% of humanity's existence. And so this need to be in nature, I think, is so profound. And this book is just really a beautiful sort of nod to that.
Wow. I can't wait to get that. And I want to thank Susan Magsamen and Ivy Ross for this terrific book and spending some time with us. For those folks who are taking in Authors and Innovators, you can get this at our independent bookseller, Wellesley Books, and our sponsor. Please do. It's a terrific read. Susan and Ivy, thank you so much for joining us. I'm hoping that people will start thinking differently and more about art.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.